When Jasmine Crockett connected Trump's inner circle to hidden shell companies and secret cash trails, it wasn't another political soap opera. It was the type of truth that individuals attempt to erase. No one foresaw what ensued. It was meant to be another Friday panel on MSNBC, 4 guests, an anchor, and 30 minutes of standard political banter. The viewers were used to the routine, but Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett had other plans. Sitting second from the left, Crockett appeared unruffled in black tailored blazer, plain gold studs in her ears, and holding a folder firmly under her arm. Plain professionalism of her appearance told nothing of the bombshell she was to unleash. As the panel discussion progressed, it was like just another run-of-the-mill show on ethics and investigations mounting in D.C. The host, Clint Brower, introduced the discussion with the usual format, nodding along as the other guests provided their usual commentary on the issue. But when Clint approached her, she didn't wait. She didn't hesitate, and the words that poured out of her would alter everything. Before we pretend this is all about Hunter Biden or some general ethics review, Crockett started, her tone icy and calm. Perhaps we ought to discuss the emails nobody wants to touch. Her words sent an instant silence. All the people around the table stilled, not knowing what would happen next. Clint blinked, visibly taken aback. "Congresswoman, what emails are you talking about?" he asked, but there was no backing down in her eyes. She was on the verge of telling them something big. Unflinching, Crockett opened the folder, and in a gesture that would become famous, pulled out a printed report, 3 pages, double-spaced, covered with highlighter markings everywhere. "These," she said matter-of-factly, "are from an anonymous source. Internal communications between a Trump associate and a finance firm in Mesa, Arizona. They cite routing legal expenses through a shell corporation to pay campaign-related expenses." As soon as the words were out of her mouth, you sensed the change in the room. One of the panelists coughed uncomfortably. Another averted their gaze. Clint wrestled for control, but too late. Simply to clarify, Clint stuttered, "We have not seen or confirmed. I didn't come here to be polite." Crockett cut in. She spoke in a firm, unflinching voice. "I am here because individuals are playing dumb while bending the rules in broad daylight." She released another bombshell, the identity of the shell company, Firefly Atlantic Holdings. It hadn't been there until 3 months prior to the previous election, and now it was no more. Social media exploded. Viewers cut the clip and posted it online with titles such as "Jasmine drops the receipts" or "She named names." Everyone was talking about it. Trump's office responded within 30 minutes with a statement in which they labeled Crockett a reckless liar and accused her of making the whole thing up. "This is just another hoax," the statement fumed. Crockett should apologize immediately. But Crockett was not apologizing. She wasn't backstage for the theatrics. She was there for answers. As she waited in the wings, her phone rang off the hook with interview requests from CNN, NBC, and even BBC America. But the one thing that really ignited the internet wasn't the words spewing from her lips. It was the video clip. A shaky video uploaded by a person who purported to be an employee in the Mesa Finance Department was viral-worthy, featuring 2 men standing in a hallway, holding a paper evidently marked Firefly Legal Bundles Q3. The video wasn't just for the message, it was for the delivery of Crockett, composed, unblinking, and unwavering. In a world where politicians tend to hesitate or recant under stress, Crockett's assertiveness was refreshing. But not everyone was convinced. Right-wing commentator Lyle Brenner dismissed her as a theater kid with a grudge and suggested that it was dangerous for elected officials to weaponize rumors. But Crockett's conviction, the way she stared straight into the camera and said, "I'm not scared of his Twitter account or whatever it is," resonated with many. The challenge was clear. She wasn't intimidated no matter what came next. Before Crockett exited the MSNBC building in Midtown Manhattan, her name was trending. Her phone continued to buzz with calls from staff, reporters, and even old college acquaintances. She didn't answer most of them. She got into her black SUV, reclined, and let out a deep breath. Jazz, her assistant Dion, interrupted the silence. "You just woke up the biggest bear in American politics. You okay?" Crockett did not respond immediately. She just sat there, eyes fixed on the window, mind racing. If Trump were as tough as he acted, she thought, he'd appear in court rather than behind the sanctuary of a Twitter account. In the meantime, at Mar-a-Lago, all was not peaceful. Within the West Wing, two of Trump's staff were reviewing clips of Crockett's interview, stopping and rewinding her comments, the reference to Firefly Atlantic Holdings, echoing in their minds. One of them muttered, "How the hell does she know that name?" The other didn't answer. He picked up his phone and began to dial. Trump, already enraged, went on to Truth Social. The capital letter rants came in waves. She's a scam. Nobody ever heard of this business until she fabricated it. This is another fake. His supporters started bombarding her inbox with threats right away. Her campaign site was targeted by a coordinated bot attack. Trolls overwhelmed her Instagram comments with snake symbols and conspiracy theories. But Crockett was not new to backlash. She'd dealt with it before, and she knew what was real and what was static. That evening, Crockett sat by herself in her Dallas apartment, replaying the clip of the MSNBC show. This time, she was paying attention to the reactions of the other panelists, the movements of their bodies, the quiver of Clint's eyebrows. That's when she knew she hadn't simply hit a nerve. She'd unearthed a buried secret, and she wasn't done. The following morning, Crockett appeared on CNN's State of the Union and doubled back. "If you don't want the truth on live television," she said to the host, Kristen Della, "then don't invite me. I'm not here for sound bites. I'm here to ask why a company with no employees, no website, and no paper trail is sending six-figure payments to attorneys handling election lawsuits. By noon, hashtags like hashtag Crockett versus Trump and hashtag Firefly emails were trending across social media, and protesters gathered outside her Dallas office. Half waved MAGA flags, calling for her resignation, while others stood in support of her boldness. But the most unsettling experience was when Crockett was fueling at a gas station in Mesquite. A soft-spoken older woman, wearing a blue windbreaker, came up to her, put a hand on her arm, and leaned in to whisper, "Don't let them scare you." It wasn't overwrought, but it was genuine. It was human. The following morning at her office, Crockett plunged even further into the investigation. The anonymous source emails had red pin marks in the margins with some names and dates highlighted. She noticed a cryptic RJ email signature. Who was this RJ? Dion ran a background check on Drew Bellamy, the name used in the emails, but came up with little. The LinkedIn account connected to him had no definite background prior to 2019. And the trend between Firefly and another firm named Saffron Dynamics was revealed. Saffron started channeling equivalent sums through equivalent conduits to the same law firms after Firefly vanished. It wasn't conclusive, but it was a beginning. The investigation took a darker turn when Crockett received a threatening voicemail from an unknown caller. "You don't know who you're messing with. Stay in your lane." But Crockett had never been one to stay in her lane. The very next evening, she met with Drew Bellamy in an empty parking lot. He handed her a flash drive containing everything he had saved before being ordered to delete it. Files, meeting notes, contact lists. "I don't know what you're looking for," he said, "but this is what I've got." Crockett took it, knowing this was only the beginning. Jasmine Crockett stood firm. She wasn't here to be used, and Firefly wasn't meant to be permanent. It was a burner. A one-time job, and Drew had been involved. He breathed heavily, thinking about his own part in the scam. "I didn't know the whole game at first," he conceded, speaking quietly. "They explained it to me as campaign security consulting. Nothing against the law. But when I looked at the names on the invoices, lawyers who weren't even licensed in Texas, payments for equipment rentals to places that don't even exist." He stopped. Then I saw the initials RJ. Drew shifted restlessly, not looking at her. "I can't say who that is. That's the one line I won't cross." Crockett narrowed her eyes, studying him. "Then why even show up?" she asked. Drew looked away briefly before answering. Because you're the first one crazy enough to say it out loud on TV, he muttered. There was a long pause between them, the only sound a distant hum of traffic and the bark of a dog somewhere behind a nearby fence. Crockett dipped into her jacket and drew out a tiny notebook. Saffron Dynamics. You recognize the name? She asked, voice firm. Drew winced just barely. Yeah, Firefly's ghost. They began integrating Firefly's holdings into it after the election. You're not mistaken to connect them, he went on, his voice lowering. Same individuals, same people, just under a different LLC in Nevada. She jotted it down and closed the notepad. May I ask you something? Drew gave her a look, nearly expectantly. Go ahead. Why you? Why are you doing this when most of them play it safe or play pretend? Crockett met his gaze with a weary but firm look. Because if I don't, they win twice, she answered, her voice sharpening with determination. The gravity of her words hung heavy in the air. Drew stepped back, clearly uneasy. Don't try to reach out to me again, he said. I won't answer, and I don't need protection. I just want out. He wheeled around and got into his car without another word. Crockett remained frozen for a second, fingers wrapped tightly around the flash drive in her hand. She didn't know everything, but she knew more than she did before. Returning to her own car, she bolted the doors and inserted the flash drive into a protected laptop. The folders popped open, each of them labeled with transactions, names she knew, some in law, some in real estate, some in campaign finance. One paper jumped out, a memo whose subject line read, Election Compliance Work Around Structure. Do not distribute. It was not conclusive evidence, but it was smoke sufficient to cause fire. When she got back to her Dallas apartment later that night, she sent a single email to a trusted contact at ProPublica. The subject line read, We need to talk off record. 5 minutes later, her phone buzzed. It was Dion. You all right? He asked, his voice filled with concern. Yeah, Crockett replied. A pause followed. You're not sleeping tonight, are you? Crockett smiled faintly. Didn't plan on it. As Crockett was assembling the pieces, others were just as busy ensuring that the pieces never coalesced into a picture. By Wednesday, the commotion over the story was raging like a full-blown storm, not only from the media, whose circles of hawks formed a vulture-like one, but from within her own ranks. One of Pennsylvania congressmen wasn't afraid to speak his mind on a group call. You're not a prosecutor, Jasmine. We already have committees for this. She didn't back down. And what has those committees done really? Hosted hearings nobody watches and let people get away? The line went quiet. While within her orbit, others were observing. The MSNBC video had now gained over 3 million views, and all the top political podcasts had devoted emergency shows to the Firefly files. Questions weren't being asked by mere voters. They were being asked by federal reporters, watchdog organizations, and even faceless Reddit users who were going deep into LLC records and campaign reports. But the heat wasn't simply coming from the public. It was emotional. In her Dallas district office, Crockett was seated across from Dion, the flash drive inserted into her computer. This isn't just money shuffling around, Dion said, tapping his fingers anxiously on the table. Some of these names, they're attached to actual contracts. Look at that one, Gerald Clint. He received a no-bid state contract for election technology 2 months after Saffron made a payment to him. Jasmine glared at the screen, her jaw set. So they're secreting donations under school finance? Dion nodded stone-faced. Appears so. Outside, the soft cries of protest chants were heard through the windows. It was a routine occurrence daily. Sign-bearing supporters with her face on them stood shoulder to shoulder with Trump supporters, brandishing flags and screaming about false news. The police waited for a reason to intervene. Her phone buzzed again, but this time, it wasn't a reporter. It was a voice she recognized from Capitol Hill, Senator Lauren Banner, a careful, calculated Democrat in the Senate. I'm not calling to scold you, Banner said, her voice measured. I just need to know, is it real? Crockett paused. Yeah, she replied. It's real. Just not all of it yet. Banner's tone mellowed. Then be wise. You don't need to drop the bombshell all at once. Build it. Support it. Don't give them an inch of ground to attack you on. Crockett wasn't seeking to take down Trump with one grand gesture. She was in pursuit of transparency, not spectacle. But as the stakes rose, people were already taking sides. In the media, on the House floor, even within her own office. Later that evening, one of her junior staff, Kira, broke in. I'm just going to say it, Kira said hesitantly. What if this gets you taken down instead? They'll accuse you of political sabotage. You know that, right? Undefined? Jasmine glanced up from her screen, her face calm. Yeah, undefined. Kira paused, obviously worried. Just make sure you're prepared for what happens when they stop coming for you with words. There was no trace of fear on Crockett's face, only the earnestness of a man who knew what was at stake, the kind of concern rooted in respect, not doubt. That night, Crockett slept merely 3 hours, waking at 4:15 a.m., staying in bed and staring up at the ceiling as the dawn started to break. In the morning, the New York Times had released an article, Crockett's claims gained traction. Is the Firefly Trail real? Reporting her ProPublica request and quoting an anonymous source in an ongoing federal campaign finance probe. No denials. Clandestine action. And then, of course, there was the email. Not from Drew. Not even signed. But attached, yes, an invoice with the heading Litigation Transport Package Palm Beach, dated October 19th, 2020. The supplier, Saffron Dynamics. The cost, $97,200. Crockett summoned Dion in from down the corridor. This isn't over, she breathed. Dion shook his head. No, it's only the start. But as Crockett was getting ready for the next move, groups were already mobilizing to discredit all she had worked on. In the hallway, outside the chamber of the Oversight Committee in D.C., there was a whiff of stale coffee and tension. She entered the building early that morning, folder under her arm, heels echoing loudly on the floor. Every journalist in the corridor turned to see her, microphones at the ready, their faces alert. Inside the room, her fellow representatives barely glanced at her. Some nodded minimally, silent gestures of encouragement, but nothing more. Then Representative Coleman Greer, a hardline Trump ally from Oklahoma, chimed in. Before we go on, he took a deep breath, I'd like to request an ethics review of Congresswoman Crockett's actions, her use of unverifiable documents to make claims against the last president in particular. It's irresponsible, politicized, and does damage to the integrity of the institution. Crockett didn't bat an eyelash. She rose to her feet with her mic. Mr. Greer, would you like to disclose how many donations your campaign received from the same corporations linked to Saffron Dynamics? He shifted in his seat, glancing off her. Oh, that's not the question. No, it's the question you fear, replied Crockett. The whispers circulated in the room. Outside the building, things were heating up. Protesters had followed them from Dallas to D.C., making waves of chaos. There had been a bomb threat on the morning of that day against Crockett's office, and they had to sweep her Hill office twice. Her communications director, Rashad, hardly slept, running around trying to coordinate security. They're putting this together, Jazz, Rashad said, his tone strained. Not just trolls. We've tracked 4 different far-right blogs posting your personal schedule. Someone's giving them the information. We're still not backing down, Crockett said, no matter how loud they get. The pressure was building, but she was only getting started. Crockett did not blink once. She just came to work one day wearing a white blouse and gray slacks, as calm as possible. I don't frighten easily, she told her workers. Not when the truth's on our side. And yet even as her supporters grew more vocal in their support, Someone near the money was going to disappear, and it would make her act faster than she'd like. The phone rang around 9 a.m. Dion answered it, half hoping for another media call. Instead, a robotic-voiced attorney from the legal department answered. Drew Bellamy's off the grid. Dion's heart was pounding. What do you mean, off the grid? He asked. He failed to appear for a deposition this morning. His cell's been out for 16 hours. No voicemail. We sent someone by his apartment in Scottsdale. Lights out, mailbox full, car gone. Dion sat down and immediately went into Jasmine's office and shut the door. He's gone. Crockett slowly lifted her head, her eyes intense. You sure? As sure as it gets, Dion replied. They sat in silence for a moment. Could be scared, Dion attempted tentatively. Could be told to vanish, Crockett replied dry. There wasn't time to wonder. Jasmine had 20 minutes on the house floor, and the heat hadn't cooled. Her inbox was full of new demands, requests, and threats, but Bellamy's vanishing act changed everything. He was the sole person who'd promised knowledge of the Firefly to Saffron Switch. Without him, everything she'd constructed was skating on thinner ice. She walked down the corridor to the floor, trying to drown out the cacophony in her brain. But then, out of nowhere, a voice called her name, low and familiar. Jasmine. She wheeled around. It was Roselle Hayworth. Hayworth was no Democrat. She was a big donor to the party, a Houston oil heiress who had taken education philanthropy as her cause. Better still, she'd served as a finance advisor to a past presidential campaign and had close connections with PACs on both sides. What are you doing here? Crockett demanded. I wanted to say something, but not here. Jasmine hesitated, then nodded. They took a shortcut down a side corridor, out of sight of the reporters. Haworth did not waste time on small talk. You're skating on thin ice, she told Crockett. Crockett raised an eyebrow. No, I don't think you do, Haworth went on. That Palm Beach bill you discovered, it wasn't an isolated incident. It was a test run. A test run for what? Crockett demanded, now wide awake. For scaling, Haworth answered. They were testing how much legal money they could pass through outside counsel without triggering FEC scrutiny. If you have more like that, I do, answered Crockett, her heart racing. Hayworth took a deep breath before going on. Then you're holding something bigger than a story. Crockett's chest thudded with her heartbeat. You knew about this? I heard whispers, answered Hayworth. People I fundraised with cutting deals with corporations I've never seen on a ballot. It didn't feel right. And you didn't say anything? Crockett asked, her voice cold. I didn't know until you spoke up. Now it's out, but you have to be careful, Jasmine. These are not just political activists. Some of these people have defense contract interests. Real power. Jasmine set her shoulders. If you're trying to scare me, you're wasting time. Haworth smiled halfway. I'm not here to scare you. I'm here to offer you options. Quiet options. You let this slip through. Back away just a little. Doors are kept open for you. Leadership paths, endorsements, money. Crockett gazed back at her, unyielding. And if you're not? Haworth gazed back. Then I hope you're okay walking alone. A long silence filled the room. Then Crockett spoke softly. I'd rather walk by myself with my back straight than packed with cowards. Hayworth looked at her for a long time before walking away without saying another word. Later that evening, Crockett sat with Rashad and Dion in the rear of a private office off of K Street. No suits. No censoring. Just the three of them, eyes weighted with long days and longer nights. So Bellamy's out, and Haworth just tried to bribe you with a smile, Rashad said, his voice tired. What's next? Crockett leaned forward. Now we go talk to the committee, to advise them not to seek permission to make it official. You sure they'll have your back? Dion asked. No, Crockett replied, shaking her head, but I'm not asking them to. She pushed the flash drive across the table. We give them everything. If they bury it, we release it. But either way, they can't claim they didn't know. Rashad shook his head. You're lighting a match in a dry field. Crockett smiled wearily. Good. Perhaps something should burn. But before they could proceed on their next move, something would happen that wasn't supposed to happen, and it would blow everything they thought they knew out of the water. 3 days after Drew Bellamy disappeared, Jasmine Crockett received a letter. Not an email. Not a DM. A letter, hand-delivered to her D.C. office in a plain white envelope with no return address. There was one page inside, typed but not signed. It read, I was in the room. Firefly wasn't the only shell. There were 6. Check filings in Wyoming under the name East Point Collective. They funneled donations through that and sent the clean money back through media buys. You've only scratched the surface. Be careful. No signature. No way of checking where it had come from. But Crockett wasn't so sure. She handed the note to Dion and reached for the phone immediately. Get the research department onto this. All East Point Collective transactions Q2 and Q3 2020. I want timelines. I want the vendors' names. Within the hour. Her staffers found 3 payments, small but unusual, all to 2 local media organizations and 1 shipping firm in Plano, Texas, from East Point Collective LLC. None of the companies had a single political client listed on their public records. Crockett reviewed the amounts, $32,000, $11,500, and $47,800, each of them barely below the threshold that would otherwise trigger mandatory FEC disclosure. They kept everything under the radar, Dion said. If you weren't looking for it, you'd never notice. Except now we are, Crockett said, her eyes resting. The next morning, she met with Representative Kelly Gerardo, a reserved Oregon ethics wonk who had once clerked for an investigation of campaign finance. Gerardo listened carefully as Crockett gave her what she had, not exaggerations, not hype. She showed her raw data, timelines, gaps, and filings. When Crockett finished talking, Gerardo sat back in her chair and asked one question. You ready for this to go all the way? Crockett would not blink. I did not arrive here to supervise chaos. I arrived here to expose it. By the weekend, Gerardo had pulled together a handful of members of the House who were willing to quietly examine the evidence in secret. Among them was Emmett De La Rosa, a seasoned San Diego prosecutor who had tried white-collar crime before he was an elected official. He said nothing, but once he had made his way through the folders, nodded once and said, "This is how they did it." The staff of the committee requested electronic copies of the drive, but Crockett's lawyers advised restraint. They're not friends, her lead counsel warned. They're temporary passengers. Save a copy. Save the originals off-site. That evening, Crockett went back to Dallas. She didn't call the press. No speech. No soundbite. Just a quiet dinner with her parents, who had followed the story with equal measures of pride and worry. Her father asked her the question she was dodging. You sure you want this fight? Crockett had no hesitation whatsoever. They're laundering democracy. Someone's got to say it. She flew back the next morning alone, in the window seat. When she boarded, she had 3 new voicemails, 2 from journalists, 1 from an unknown caller. She listened to the 3rd twice. The voice was male, soothing, older, with a slight northeastern inflection. You don't know me, but I'm close to someone who's very worried about what's coming. Not because you're wrong, but because if you're right, it means everything's been broken a lot longer than we figured. You're not just looking at Trump, you're looking at a system that nourished him. Be careful who you trust. She left it there. She saved it and sent it to Dion. Crockett stood hours later at a podium outside the Capitol. Press cameras in line. Mics pointed squarely at her. I've given the Oversight Committee everything I have, she said, her voice strong. I trust the process, what's left of it. But let me be clear. If this evidence disappears, I won't. A reporter called out, "Are you accusing Congress of corruption?" "I'm saying sunlight doesn't scare me," Crockett replied, "but it terrifies some of the people behind those checks." It was firm. It was clean. No theatrics. At home, she got a text from Gerardo. "Check your mailbox." It's happening. Crockett opened her email. There it was. Subject: request to open preliminary review. Firefly and East Point contributions. It was real now, recorded, tracked. But whereas the system had finally noticed Crockett, the public's response would be something other than that. And not everyone would be a stranger. By week's end, the name Jasmine Crockett was ubiquitous. Morning television, late-night programming, partisan blogs, and out-there podcasts. Some described her as brave. Others described her as reckless. And then there were those who groused, simply reposting her clips with fire emojis or snake gifs, depending on the side of the divide on which they found themselves. It was divisive, predictable, but there was something new now, a current running below the turmoil. People were listening. Not everyone approved of what they heard. One morning, Crockett left her apartment in D.C. and found a handwritten note taped to her windshield. "Keep talking. We're closer than you think." It read, no name, no symbol, just black marker on a piece of torn printer paper. She did not blink. She folded it up, handed it to Dion, and pressed on. Later that same day, a woman in her 60s approached Crockett in a Georgetown coffee shop. She had a tremble in her voice, but stood solid on her feet. "I saw your interview last night," she said. "I worked on a Senate campaign in '84. Then they stashed things in briefcases and shredded paper. Now they stash it in code and shell companies. Keep it up. You're not mistaken." Crockett thanked her and sat quietly for a few minutes afterward, stirring her coffee but not sipping it. Back in Washington, her staff was taking calls from state offices, law clinics, retired prosecutors, and even 2 whistleblowers from other campaigns who wanted to share intel. Suddenly, good Samaritans with nothing to gain were emerging from the shadows, but not all spotlights were benevolent. That Friday, Rashad pulled her aside and held up his phone. A far-right West Virginia influencer had just uploaded a video alleging he had evidence Crockett's staff fabricated the Firefly emails. He never displayed the evidence, of course, just crazy claims and blurry screenshots. "That's going to go viral," Rashad said. "It's nonsense, but it doesn't matter." Crockett didn't even glance at the screen. "Let them yap. We've got paper. We've got witnesses. They've got YouTube." Still, the threats accumulated. A digital security company monitoring Crockett's online presence identified a discussion forum in which users discussed tracking her schedule and dropping by. They suggested keeping her public profile low for the next 72 hours, but Crockett would not go underground. She booked a town hall in Fort Worth for the next weekend. No virtual broadcast, no closed doors, just folding chairs, a handheld mic, and about 130 people who showed up in the rain. She stood in front of a community center gym and spoke to the crowd for nearly an hour about money and politics, about how elections are paid for, and about the parts of the system people learn not to see. Then in the Q&A, a young man stood up, maybe mid-20s, hoodie, jeans, agitated energy. "My uncle was on a legal team defending one of those companies you were talking about," he said. "He told us not to talk to anyone, not even family members. Said it was just consulting documents, but I looked up the addresses." One was a shipping warehouse. The other was an empty house for years. The room went silent. Crockett didn't press him. She didn't ask for more. She simply said, "That's why we're here, to stop pretending we don't see what's in front of us." Later that evening, when the rain had slowed, Crockett had gone outside the center. There was a black sedan on the opposite street, nothing out of the ordinary, but something was not quite right. It moved the moment she looked its direction. Dion caught up with her a few seconds later. "We got another tip. Somebody wants to talk. Says they were part of Firefly's transition legal team back in 2020. Crockett smiled tiredly. Let's hear it. Wants to meet in Alexandria tomorrow. Says they have papers, but will only give them up in person. She exhaled. Let's do it. But the Alexandria meeting would not be a setup. What Crockett would find out next was not about Trump. It was about the machinery that constructed him. They met in a dimly lit alleyway behind a bookstore in Alexandria, Virginia, at the time of the precise moment before dusk. Crockett wore a black coat, and her dark hair was pulled back into a ponytail. Dion waited around the corner, leaning against a rented sedan with one hand deep in her jacket pocket. The man arrived right on time at 6:07 p.m., early 40s, plain clothes, wire-rimmed glasses. He rushed along, kept his head down, and held tightly against his body a manila envelope as though it would disappear if he let go of it. "Miss Crockett," he said, looking around over his shoulder, "you have 5 minutes." She didn't flinch. "What are you bringing me?" "Internal memos. Legal strategies. Conference call notes. They're mostly not about Trump specifically, but they reveal the machinery, PACs operating in tandem with consultants who don't really consult. They circulate money. The hands on the checks change, but the hands behind them remain the same." She scanned the envelope. Handwritten scribbles, computer printouts with metadata. One section stood out particularly boldly. Legal defense funds should be at least 2 degrees removed from campaign activities, with a footnote appended, use intermediaries through trusted firms. These were distributed to Firefly. He nodded. And Saffron and East Point. All chapters in one book. "And the writers?" Crockett asked. He smiled faintly, sadly. "Primarily lawyers who found the proper loopholes. 1 or 2 lobbyists. The rest, they simply looked the other way." Crockett stopped. "Why now?" Because someone finally said it aloud. He headed for the door. "You ever testify?" she yelled after him. "Never had the desire to. Still don't." Then he vanished around the corner. That evening, Crockett sat alone in her apartment, the paper laid out on the table. She didn't touch her phone. She didn't speak to the press for an entire hour. She just read, highlighted, and took notes in the margins. Her pen never changed pace. The story began with Trump, the name everyone already knew, the chaos that people had become numb to. But now she saw the breadth. This wasn't so much about one man. It was about all the individuals who contributed to the noise feeling commonplace. She considered that young man in the town hall, the woman in the coffee shop, the note on her windshield. And for the first time in weeks, she felt something nestle deep within her chest, not peace per se, but clarity. The next morning, she held a press conference. No podium to stand on this time, no flag wall to stand behind, just her in front of a pack of reporters under the drizzly sky. "I ran to Congress to legislate," she explained, her voice firm. "But recently, I've spent more time revealing than voting. And I've learned something. The institutions we have faith in to keep power in line are too courteous to challenge it. They'll read it, stash it, dissect it, but never do anything with it. Well, I'm not a person for gracious silence. What I've discovered isn't about one candidate or one firm. It's about how easy it's gotten to manipulate money and sway without reprisal. And the worst part? We conditioned ourselves to avert our gaze. I won't be complicit with that." One journalist shouted out, "Are you going to seek formal hearings?" Crockett nodded. "Yes, and not in secret." The reporting was swift. National publications, independent media, foreign wire services. Some labeled it a political risk. Others labeled it a moral position. But the most surprising call was that night, from one who was part of the Trump sphere of influence. Not a loyalist, not a talking head, someone whose name had flashed briefly in one of the memos from the Alexandria man. She picked up on the third ring. "I viewed the conference," the voice stated. "If you want to know who linked Firefly and East Point, look at the 2019 San Diego GOP retreat. There's a photo. One man is in both groups. He brings it all together." A silence. "You'll know when you see it." Click. That evening, Crockett scrolled through photos of the retreat, looking until she saw it. A staff photo of donors and strategists on a golf course. And there he was, smiling off in the background, sunglasses in his hand. She'd heard his name before, but never put a face or a role to it, just some background donor. Until tonight. She drew around his face, wrote his name on a pad of paper, leaned back in her chair and gazed up at the ceiling, whispering to herself, "No more silence." Sometimes shouting in the darkness doesn't change the system, but it illuminates who's been happy in the dark. That's where true change begins, not in the public eye, but in what you make people see. If you still think truth matters, subscribe, because we're not done.